Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
I'm Bob Scarborough.
and we are
The
the FAIRtax Guys. I've got a new Rubik's Cube,
would you look at that now?
steam locomotives. That is the 611, which is the locomotive that's on frame right here over my left shoulder. And on the bottom of it is the 1218. That's the other locomotive in the picture behind me. Then I've got several, that's upside down, several other ones, however that goes. But
Yeah.
they work cool. Of course, I've still got Fat Albert here, so we're good
Oh
on
yeah,
the Rubik's cubes.
well, that's wonderful. I guess somebody makes those now. You can send them pictures and they'll slap them
Yep.
on a cube.
Mm-hmm. Actually, there's several sellers on Amazon that do that. I found one I particularly like. But anyway, that's what we've got. Got back to the railroad theme for today. But we are set to go here on FAIRtax Power Radio, and you know what that means.
That's right. Congress.gov.
We have
Congress.gov.
we have got to dig into Congress.gov and see what the Congress critters are up to. And the very first item we up for bids on the show today is heading directly into the Hall of Shame because it's quite similar to one that we put there just a week or so ago. But this is a different bill, different sponsor, Rashida Tlaib, so that should tell you where it's coming from. This is HR 5298. This is the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act of 2025. Now, we just put in the Hall of Shame, let's see, HR 5019 not long ago, the CEO Accountability and Responsibility Act. But this is the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to impose a corporate tax rate increase on companies whose ratio of compensation of the CEO or other highest paid employee to median worker compensation is more than 50 to 1, and of course for other purposes. So there you go.
They need to make sure for other purposes is in that one because I mean you can't have a bill
Well,
at
I,
all that
I
in
don't
there.
I don't like the idea of the government telling people, if you make too much money, we're going to tax you too much. It's just that kind of stuff. Well, I better get off of this soapbox, or we're going to be in trouble. Let's just say that one belongs in the Hall of Shame, and it is going straight there.
I'll help you get it. And I'll pay express freight.
Okay, continuing on here. This is S. On the rest of these are from the Senate side. 2791. This is Senator Bennett from Colorado. The SEED, SEED, the SEED Act. And you dig into this thing and you see that it is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to allow early childhood educators to take the educator expense deduction and, of course, for other purposes. SEED, in this case, standing for Supporting Early Childhood Educators Deduction Act. So there we go. They've got a tax deduction that they're going to allow early childhood education. It seems to me that if it's an educator expense deduction, that early childhood educators are indeed educators, and it wouldn't take a special act of Congress to give them access to that deduction. But apparently that's not the case. And so the complexity of the tax code rears its ugly head once again.
And you got to be careful now with the SEED Act because the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a federal SEED Act also. You want to make sure that you don't confuse the two because one is about seeds and the other one is about early childhood education.
Correct. And wait a minute. I'm getting thirsty again. I've got to get the chair one here. Before we continue, and the next item up for bids is from Senator Houston in Ohio. We've seen something like this before. The Resilient Tire Supply and Jobs Act. So tire supply and jobs pulled together in the same bill. And this is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to establish the retreaded tire credit. That's got to be one of the most, I don't know how you describe that, one of the most off the wall tax credits I've heard of, the retreaded tire credit, to require federal agencies to consider the use of retreaded tires and for other purposes. I know we touched on this before. I think they had to be in the last Congress.
Boy, oh boy. But they don't have any, purposes in there. I mean, you could probably pile all kinds of stuff on there.
Oh, mercy. Okay, but
A lot of
it's
tires placed in service after December 31st. So you'd have to wait until the end of the year to put new tires on.
it's just crazy that the tax code is dealing with stuff like that. I mean, that's indescribable. Here we go. This is S 2779 from Senator Gallego in Arizona, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to exclude strike benefits from gross income. Apparently, Senator Gallego wants to encourage people to go on strike by excluding their strike benefits from gross income. No tax on strike benefits.
It's funny. I mean, if you're going to go on strike, I mean, would you still be expecting a paycheck while you were negotiating? And I guess some people would have to say, okay, well, I guess I'll go ahead and cross that line.
You know, I've never been involved in that. I would assume, though, that when a union goes on strike against a particular employer, they no longer get their regular pay, but they get strike benefits from the union. That's part of what their union dues are supposed to be able to cover. But now they're saying, well, if now you're getting paid by your union instead of your employer, your strike benefits, we're going to exempt that from gross income if, again, Senator Gallego has his way about that.
Gracious goodness. Yeah.
One more.
They must have a clear donative intent. And in other words, intend that strike benefit as a gift. So that's where they're heading.
That can be interpreted as encouraging people to go on strike so they get their tax-free income versus what they have to pay taxes on. Okay, last one. This is from Senator Cortez Masto, M-A-S-T-O, Nevada. The Wager Act, W-A-G-E-R, the Wager Act. What do you think that's going to have something to do with?
I'll bet you that it's got something to do with gambling.
I bet you're exactly right. This is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to exempt sports betting from the tax on authorized wagers. Now, I tell you what, I'm not sure what an authorized wager is, but apparently there's a tax on it. And now sports betting, that is, I'm not a gambler. I can't tell you that, but I know that the betting on sports is a huge industry. It would have to be a major component in the overall betting world. But if you exempt sports betting from the tax on authorized wagers, of course that's from Nevada, where you have all the casinos and all that stuff. But anyway,
so goes all the other states that are now allowing online betting.
Oh, mercy. Well, anyhow, that's again, the whole idea behind doing this is just to illustrate the absurdity of what goes into the tax code and, just the constantly changing nature of it. It's shifting sand that you can't plan for the future because it's always different. And again, the whole idea in pointing all this stuff out is to make the point that we need to yank it all out by the roots, replace it with the fair tax, a nice, steady, simple, stable kind of tax platform that doesn't have all that kind of nonsense in it. So I was looking there. We've got a pretty good size 2025 Hall of Shame to go through at the end of the year. So this has been a particularly active year for the Congress critters doing crazy things to the tax code. But and we're right here every week to keep an eye on them and see what you can do. But again, what we do is put the words Internal Revenue Code in quotes, the search function at the top of the Congress.gov page, select current legislation in the current Congress. And if you do that, you got back 1,225 hits as of the time we're recording this. That's crazy.
Yeah, and they're busy now. They're back in session for sure. And so you'll see a lot of activity between now and the time where they all go on the campaign trail here in a few months.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's move along here on FAIRtax Power Radio. We have been kind of playing with artificial intelligence here recently. And I saw something on Facebook the other day that I thought was really interesting because it kind of opened my eyes to a new way of thinking about artificial intelligence. Up to now, I personally used it, just to find information. What
Yeah.
time's the Alabama game and what channel's it on, and to answer specific questions and stuff like that, just to find information. But someone on Facebook asked an artificial intelligence application to examine all of the major religions in the world and then pick the one that you would choose to follow. And not going to get into how that was answered because that's not our topic. But that turned me on to thinking, wait a minute, I had never thought to ask artificial intelligence to compare several different options and pick one. And again,
Right.
I'm not sure how much actual intelligence, thinking ability, cognitive reasoning that today's artificial intelligence has, because a lot of times it just finds information and will footnote the source where it finds stuff. So I'm not sure how much actual thinking artificial intelligence can do today. But that just caused me to, all right, I'm going to ask it this one. If I were an American taxpayer weighing the income tax system against the fair tax, which one, if you were an American taxpayer, which system would you prefer? And I asked that question to three different artificial intelligence applications: Microsoft's Copilot, Elon
Yeah.
Musk Grok, and the Chat GPT, to ask them just to evaluate the income tax versus the fair tax and pick which one you'd rather live under if you were a taxpayer. And again, I'm not sure how much cognitive reasoning and thinking went into the process, but
Mhm.
I was somewhat pleased to see that all three of the artificial intelligence applications I asked that question to came back and said, I'd pick the fair tax.
Yeah, I mean, and all we're asking it is like a comparative, question. Look at, filter through. Did you have to give it any direction beyond that as far as
Nope.
what what to look for? Income tax, consumption, flat.
No,
You just ask the
I,
question.
I just asked you, if you were an American taxpayer, which system would you prefer to live under? The income tax and the fair tax. So of course it had to you compare and contrast the two,
Oh,
look at the
right.
pluses and minuses of both of them. But all three of them, Chat GPT, Copilot, and Grok, all three came back and said that they would choose the fair tax. And so I just cut and pasted their answers into a Word document and sent it to you. So let's just kind of go through what all three of these artificial intelligence things gave as their reasons for preferring the fair tax over the income tax. We'll start with the one at Copilot. At the
Yeah.
top of the Copilot list was the fair tax would be preferable because of its simplicity and transparency. No more IRS filings, no more W-2s, no more 1099s, no more deductions, no more audits. All that stuff goes out the window, yank it out by the roots, and replace it with a fair tax. Because the fair tax replaces all federal income taxes, including the payroll and corporate taxes, with a single national sales tax. And they like the transparency here. You see your tax burden every time you buy something. The amount of fair tax you pay on a retail purchase of new goods and services is printed right there on your receipt. The embedded costs of the income tax system that we're paying now, you
Yeah.
don't see, but it likes the simplicity, and Copilot also likes the transparency of the fair tax versus the income tax. And I will agree with that.
It's really something. Uh, and this is really, I mean, it's going through, I guess, and I would question if it's actually thinking and reasoning about this, but based on evidence, based on data that's available, this Copilot has come up with some pretty solid reasoning, even though we know that it's
Yep.
hard to believe that a computer would be able to think and
Dig into their point number two there.
elimination of income-based penalties. Under the income tax, working more or earning a raise can push you into a higher bracket. The fair tax removes this disincentive to productivity. Retirement
That
savings investments grow tax-free until spent, encouraging long-term planning.
I like the fact that Copilot here recognizes that the income tax is a disincentive to productivity. the harder you work, the more you get taxed. That's not good. So I'm glad they figured that out. Of course, it mentioned the prebate. Every legal resident receives a monthly prebate to cover taxes on basic necessities, making the system progressive in effect and ensuring that low-income households are not disproportionately burdened by the sales tax, which is an argument that some dishonest critics would like to push. The fact is, we've mentioned this time and time again, the prebate it covers every dime of fair tax you pay on your basic necessity purchases, i.e. you're spending up to the poverty level, and you get to decide what your necessities are. There's not a list that's this is tax exempt and this isn't. So it's simple, it's easy, it's effective, and there's one more here.
Yeah. Economic growth potential. By removing taxes on income and capital gains, the fair tax could stimulate investment, job creation, and entrepreneurship. U.S. exports become more competitive globally since embedded taxes are stripped from production costs.
All right. So those are the reasons that Copilot thinks the fair tax is better than the income tax, although they did mention some, potential possible problems with it. The trade-offs that call them regressive risks without the prebate. And I'm not sure how relevant that one is, because if we just mentioned that the prebate is going to cover all of the tax you pay on your basic necessities, but Copilot noted that a flat sales tax hits lower income earners harder unless the prebate is robust and well managed. And I see no reason why that should be a concern. And again, critics worry about the burden on seniors and those with fixed incomes who've already paid income taxes on their savings. Now, we mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. A lot of retirement savings have not already been taxed. And even with the income tax, you're still paying taxes when you buy things. Just with the income tax, you don't see it. With the fair tax, you will.
Right. And there are transition challenges that Copilot mentions as a possible trade-off. Or something that would be a little bit more, make it a little bit more difficult. The transition challenges like moving from income tax to consumption would be and quite possibly a seismic shift. There could be price shocks, compliance issues, black market risks. I don't know. State-owned income might struggle to align with the federal change.
Well, I think the black market risks, of course, is a red herring. The only thing that would spur black markets would be if the fair tax makes everything just wildly more expensive than it is now. We've already gone over time and time again. That will not be the case. Again, the fair tax replaces the embedded costs that are already there that you don't see. And again, huge majority of the retail sales in this country are made by your huge retailers like Walmart and Amazon. So even if there are black markets, the percentage of the total retail market that could affect is be minuscule. So that's not going to be a problem. And though it notes behavioral changes as well, people might avoid tax purchases. Well, I'll tell you what, I would consider that not a bug, but a feature. That you have the choice. If you want to buy a used car versus a new car, you can avoid the tax legally that way. So you've got choices with the fair tax that you don't have with the income tax. And so shift spending to untaxed services or secondhand goods, hey, that's a positive.
Yeah, I would think so. It also the revenue could be reduced. I see this as a reaction to what the fair tax might bring to the market. And obviously the market is going to be what the market is, regardless of how we tax ourselves, whether it's income
I think there's universal agreement among economists all across the political spectrum that a consumption tax is much better for the economy than an income tax. The GDP growth under the fair tax has been projected into double digits in some cases, where a 4% growth under the income tax is considered a really robust performance. We're looking at twice that and then some that the fair tax would ignite in the economy. So I don't think there's really much of a problem with the revenues going down. Besides, of course, the fair tax was designed from the ground up to be revenue neutral to start with. But when you consider the positive effects that it's going to have on the economy, I think it's going to actually end up bringing more into the federal treasury than that is. But that's what the co-pilot has to say. Let's look at what Grok, GROK, that's the artificial intelligence that's embedded within the X or X former Twitter application. Of course, they've got an app, little app on your own that you can download. And Grok says, and I am quoting, as an American taxpayer, choosing between the income tax system and the fair tax, a national retail sales tax proposal, depends on weighing their trade-offs based on simplicity, fairness, economic impact, and personal circumstances. I'll break it down objectively, considering key aspects of both systems, and then offer a reasoned preference. It's what Grok says it will do. And it first attacks the current income tax system. How it works: taxes income from wages, investments, and other sources at a progressive rate, 0 to 37%. It includes deductions, credits, and complex filing requirements. Pros: progressive taxation that higher owners pay a larger share. It's familiar. Everybody's been messing with this thing for a century now. Deductions, credits that we look at every week in Fair Tax Power Radio. You can target particular stuff. So I think that's a positive. And it says stable revenue because it captures income from various sources, less volatile than consumption-based taxes. And I think they've got that one dead wrong. I think consumption is a much more stable platform than income, because even if you lose your job and you don't have any income, you still spend. You've got savings. You can borrow. There are several ways that you can fund consumption. Only one, at least if you're working for a paycheck, that's how you do your income. So I think Grok is wrong on that one to say that the income tax is more stable than a consumption tax. But Grok listed a whole bunch of cons with the fair tax, with the income tax. Go.
Okay, complexity of the income tax. The tax code is thousands of pages, requiring significant time and money to comply. As an example, an average 13 hours and $400 plus per return for many taxpayers. Maybe a little bit less in some cases, but 13 hours to do your income tax. Does that met out pretty closely for everybody? How about?
So I don't use quite that much, but yeah, I can see how a more complex return than I have could easily consume more than 13 hours.
And it's intrusive, requires detailed reporting of income, deductions, and personal financial data, distorts behavior. Higher rates can discourage work, saving, and investments. Double taxation, taxes income when earned and again when invested. For example, capital gains when you sell something, an appreciated asset, and dividends as you are able to appreciate a check every so often when your stock announces a dividend. Compliance cost is another thing. IRS budgets around $14.3 billion annually based on 2023 numbers, plus billions in private compliance costs.
Okay, then it goes on. We're getting short on time here, so we have to kind of skip through part of this. It describes how it works. Grok mentions the simplicity, transparency, that it encourages savings and investment, broadens the tax base, and stimulates economic growth as pros of the fair tax, raises the same regressivity concerns and the transition changes and stuff like that. But let's go down to Grok's conclusion. My preference as a hypothetical taxpayer. Go.
If I were an American taxpayer, I'd lean toward the fair tax for its simplicity, transparency, and potential to boost economic growth by untaxing productivity. The income tax system's complexity and inefficiency are major drawbacks. The fair tax's prebate could address regressivity if well implemented, ensuring low-income households aren't disproportionately burdened. However, according to Grok, he'd want a clear transition plan to avoid price shocks and protections against evasion. In other words, a strong auditing of retailers. With that said, the income tax's progressivity and stability are strong arguments, especially for those prioritizing redistribution. My preference, Grok's preference, assumes a well-designed prebate and enforcement system which isn't guaranteed. If those falter, the income tax might be safer despite its flaws.
Okay. Well, I say we're running short on time here on FairTax Power Radio, so let's just leave that what it is and scoot down to what ChatGPT says. It comes right out of the box and says, ChatGPT says, if I were an American taxpayer, I'd likely prefer the fair tax system over the current income tax, although with some reservations. The fair tax, a national sales tax that replaces most federal income taxes, including payroll taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. I would lean towards it again. Simplicity and transparency at the top of the list in ChatGPT's book. The income tax is complicated. The filing process is confusing and time consuming. Deductions, credits, exemptions, and can be difficult to navigate. While a fair tax is much simpler for the average person to understand. You pay it at the point of sale. No need to file annual tax returns. No more complicated tax codes or surprise tax bills. So ChatGPT likes that.
Yeah, no more taxes on savings and investment. We talk about that all the time because the fair tax only taxes consumption. It will, I feel, as I've always said, encourage more saving, investing, and entrepreneurship since people will no longer face taxes on their earnings or investments.
And again, taxation based on consumption. With the income tax, everybody's taxed regardless of how much they spend. So somebody who lives below their means and saves a lot could end up paying the same amount of taxes as someone who spends recklessly under the income tax. But the fair tax, you're only pay that when you buy something. So if you save or live frugally, you end up paying less tax, and that could be a fairer system. People with different lifestyles. And so we got about a minute left. Let's scoot through these last ones real quick.
Economic growth is encouraged. Consumption tax based on what you consume. It would likely remove distortions in the economy that come from taxing income. No taxes on Social Security benefits. It's a sales tax. Social Security benefits wouldn't be taxed directly. And a potential to end tax evasion. It's a risk of underreporting in the income tax and more. The fair tax, while tax evasion is still a concern, it would be harder to avoid the sales tax since it's built into the price of goods and services and collected at the sales desk.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the evasion question is solidly settled in favor of the fair tax. When you consider how much evasion goes on with the income tax, we've talked about it time and again, over $1 trillion of income tax is owed but never collected because people are cheating the system. It is much, much harder to cheat a sales tax. It's included in the price of the things you buy. So I think and there have been studies that says evasion, the fair tax would knock that down by 90 to 95%. And so again, we're pretty much, oops, my timer is ringing in my ear here. I got to turn that off. But we're pretty much done here for this edition of FairTax Power Radio. I hope that little chime is not being recorded on our thing here, but it's ringing in my ear. The timer's up. So we got to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. But again, I think it was quite telling that all three of the different chat artificial intelligence applications that we talked about here, all three of them chose the fair tax. Again, we're not sure how much cognitive reasoning goes into that, but I think it is significant that all three of them, three different independent things, came to the same conclusion. The fair tax is better than the income tax, and we have been trying to make that point here for almost 10 years here on FairTax Power Radio.
That's right. Thank you, Bob, for everything you do and all the people that are out there listening and watching for the work that's being done on behalf of HR 25, the Fair Tax Act.
All righty. Well, I say that's going to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Again, thank you so much for listening and sharing the video. That does help us a great deal. Till we meet again, same time, same channel next week. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FairTax Guys, providing you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you will demand it.
So, how much will I bring home?
Go ahead.
How much do you make? We'll just say 40,000. Okay, keep it simple, throw out the deductions, all that stuff. So, you got your 40K, right? Now the first 8,000 is going to be taxed at 10%. The 8 to 33,000 is going to be taxed at 15%. And the 33 to 40, of course, is 25%. So that brings your total to $6,345.
Okay, so the average is what?
16%. Okay, and then on top of that, you got Medicare, which is 1.5%, and then of course your Social Security, which is 6.2%. So actually, your new total is $9,405.
Which is 20.
23.65%. You're getting it. You're getting it. Don't even get me started on what the boss has to pay. He's got to pay a portion of your taxes as well, so you don't have to.
Right. And you?
Oh, you bring home every penny.